Welcome to Sign Facts, where every movie hides a secret. Every scene tells a deeper story. And every frame contains details most viewers never notice. From legendary blockbusters and mind-bending science fiction, to dark thrillers, unforgettable horror, and hidden cinematic gems, we explore the facts, theories, Easter eggs, behind-the-scenes secrets, and untold stories that make movies truly unforgettable. This isn't just watching movies, this is discovering what lies beneath them. Subscribe to Sign Facts and step beyond the screen. It's something her mother once told her: in life, there are only two roads, the one you choose for yourself, and the one other people choose for you. But even with all her doubts, Enola has no intention of leaving her fiancé Tilda copyright at the altar, so she jumps into a carriage and urges the driver to go as fast as he can. Unfortunately, the ride doesn't stay peaceful for long. Halfway there, someone begins chasing them on horseback. The rider is moving fast, and his intentions clearly aren't friendly. The driver warns Enola to stay inside and hold on tight, explaining that Malta, where the wedding is supposed to take place, is crawling with bandits and thieves. As far as he can tell, this masked rider is probably one of them, but the rider has picked the wrong woman to chase. Within seconds, Enola climbs onto the roof of the moving carriage, grabs a rifle, and prepares to fire. Just before she pulls the trigger, though, the man pulls off his mask and reveals his face. It's Watson, Sherlock's trusted assistant and the one man her brother relies on more than anyone else. The shock hits Enola at exactly the wrong moment. She loses her balance, slips off the speeding carriage, and crashes hard onto the ground. After a painful fall, she gets back on her feet and immediately gives Watson the scolding he deserves for approaching her like a criminal with a bandana over his face. But Watson doesn't have time to defend his terrible entrance. He's brought news far worse than a ruined wedding arrival. Sherlock has been kidnapped. To understand how things got to this point, the story flashes back to the time when Enola finally received her official detective certificate and began working alongside her brother. Sherlock handled the wealthy clients, the powerful families, the high-profile cases. Enola, meanwhile, focused on ordinary people, using those smaller investigations to sharpen her skills and gain real experience. One afternoon, while they were looking into a strange murder case, Enola explains that from Monday to Friday, detective work made her truly happy, and those were the days filled with clues, suspects, and the thrill of solving mysteries. But weekends were different. Weekends belonged to Ernest Tewksbury, the boy who had captured her heart and become the reason behind nearly every smile she wore. Everything seemed wonderful until the day Ernest suddenly dropped to one knee and proposed. In that instant, Enola's face went pale. The proposal was romantic, yes, but it also forced her to imagine a future she'd never fully prepared herself for. News of the young female detective becoming a proper lady spread through the city almost immediately, and people everywhere seemed fascinated by it. Everyone had something to say. Everyone, that is, except Sherlock. He had become completely absorbed in a case of his own, so consumed by the mystery that he stopped writing his notes in normal, readable language. Instead, he invented a strange private code so Enola couldn't understand what he was working on, shutting her out of his progress entirely. About a week later, Enola traveled to Malta to meet Ernest's mother. Over lunch, the older woman asked who she wanted to invite to the wedding. Enola handed her a tiny slip of paper with only a few names on it: her brother, Watson, and no one else. The reason was simple. Ever since explosives became easier to get hold of in London, Enola's mother had grown even more unpredictable than before, and her actions had pushed her close to the top of the city's most wanted list. It was during that same lunch that Enola learned the wedding wouldn't be held in London at all. Instead, it would take place in Malta, a small island far from the noise and complications of city life. Ernest's mother explained that she herself had married there, which made the place deeply meaningful to the family, and because of that, refusing felt almost impossible. From that moment on, everything connected to becoming a respectable lady began swallowing Enola's life piece by piece. Expensive fabrics, Grand wedding dresses, formal traditions, stiff manners, all of it appeared around her as though her old life were slowly being packed away. Then came the dinners, not small, comfortable gatherings with people she actually cared about, but enormous, polished affairs full of important people who were somehow both powerful and painfully dull, the kind of guests who barely looked in your direction unless they'd already found something about you to judge. During one of those dinners, Ernest's Uncle Samson stood up to make a toast. Samson wasn't just another relative, he was the man responsible for the island's security, which meant people listened when he spoke. But instead of offering a warm family welcome, he used the moment to remind everyone of Enola's modest background. The comment drew a few quiet laughs, and he added that he hoped the marriage wouldn't slow Ernest's rise in the House of Lords. At that point it became perfectly clear, among the wealthy and politically powerful, Enola wasn't exactly being welcomed with open arms. While most of the room was busy judging her, something else caught Sherlock's eye. Above the gathering, away from the center of attention, a strange man was watching everything carefully. He stayed out of sight, but his eyes never stopped moving, almost like a predator studying its target from a hidden branch. Later that night, after the dinner ended, Enola could tell her brother was troubled, so she went to his room to speak with him privately. Sherlock didn't soften his words. He told her plainly that he never imagined she'd choose this life for herself, that she was accepting a tradition she barely understood and trading her freedom for a polished, predictable future built around a title she'd probably never even care to use. In his eyes, it was more than disappointing, it was a waste. Giving up the Holmes name, stepping away from her talent, and burying the instincts that made her such a brilliant detective felt to him like the worst decision she could possibly make. Enola tried to reassure him that nothing had to change, but Sherlock didn't believe it for a second. He asked her if she truly thought Ernest, a man heading toward a political career in the House of Lords, would simply let his wife run around the city chasing criminals, risking her life, and giving society something new to gossip about every week. Sherlock knew the world they were entering, and in his mind, marriage wouldn't protect Enola's freedom. The man quickly realizes he's being followed, and the moment he spots Enola, he bolts, running through the building, grabbing and throwing whatever he can find to slow her down. But Enola isn't easy to shake. She chases him through the corridors until she finally corners him in a hallway. Before she can question him properly, though, he collapses. That's when she sees the blood. Someone has shot him in the chest. Above them, a window slams shut in an instant, too fast for her to see who was hiding there. The shooter vanishes before she can catch even a glimpse. The dying man struggles to speak, and with his final breath he utters one strange word: wrath. At that moment, the word means nothing to Enola, just another loose thread in a case that's growing more confusing by the hour. That night, she spends most of her time trying to connect everything in her mind. Sherlock has vanished. The man she suspected might have been involved is now dead, and the only clues she has are two seemingly unrelated fragments: CS and wrath. To make things worse, Sherlock's journals are full of coded writing she can't yet understand. Whatever answers are hidden inside them won't reveal themselves easily, and she knows she needs more time, a time she doesn't have. A little later, a shadow appears near the doorway. Enola reacts instantly, her survival instincts taking over before her brain can catch up. She grabs a candlestick and attacks first, only to realize a second later that the intruder isn't an enemy at all. It's Ernest, and she's just broken his nose. The poor boy had only come looking for her, trying to find the right words after everything that happened. Enola immediately tries to explain. She was racing toward the wedding as fast as she could when Watson suddenly showed up with news about Sherlock. But Ernest only hears one part of that explanation. As fast as she could. To him, those words confirm something he'd already feared, that she hadn't been calmly on her way to marry him. She'd been rushing, uncertain, possibly even moments from turning back. And for Ernest, that's enough to hurt deeply. He doesn't shout or accuse her dramatically. He simply says he truly hopes she finds Sherlock. He knows how capable she is, but when it comes to their relationship, their wedding, and how he's feeling right now, he has nothing left to say. Then he walked away, leaving Enola alone with both the case and the damage she's caused. The next morning, chaos erupts across the castle. A fire has broken out and flames are spreading through the property. Panic fills the halls as people rush in every direction. Enola immediately starts searching for Ernest, only to learn he ran into the burning building to save his mother. The problem is that neither of them has come back out, and with smoke thickening and flames growing stronger, visibility worsens by the second. Enola knows that waiting for someone else to act could cost them their lives, so she finally stops hiding the ability she's been trying so hard to bury under dresses, manners, and expectations. This isn't the moment for pretending to be a proper lady. This is the moment for Enola Holmes. She pushes into the burning castle, moving through the smoke and heat as she searches for Ernest and his mother. When she finally reaches her future mother-in-law's room, she finds Ernest inside, frantic and desperate, trying to find her before the fire consumes everything around them. But as Enola looks around the room, she notices something that changes everything. The door has been forced open. That means Ernest's mother wasn't trapped inside. Someone came in, took her, and left before the fire spread. Watson quickly starts helping both Enola and Ernest, but Enola's confidence is beginning to crack. For the first time, she feels genuinely uncertain about whether she can follow the trail Sherlock left behind. And now the pressure is even worse. This is no longer just about saving her brother. Ernest's mother is missing too, and to him, she's one of the most important people in the world. Shaken and terrified, Ernest tells Enola they have to move quickly. His mother isn't like Sherlock. She isn't trained for danger, doesn't know how to survive captivity, and doesn't have the same strength to endure something like this. Ernest knows that better than anyone. While Ernest leaves to seek help from his uncle, Enola forces herself to focus on what she can actually do. She returns to her future mother-in-law's room and studies the scene properly, piece by piece rebuilding what happened there. Soon, one thing becomes clear: the kidnappers were searching for something, and when they couldn't find it, they started the fire not simply to destroy the room, but to make sure nobody could follow the trail. Strangely, all the expensive jewelry has been left untouched, which tells Enola she isn't dealing with ordinary thieves. Whoever came here wasn't interested in money, they were after something far more specific. Then, beneath the mattress, Enola finds a small box marked with a symbol she recognizes from Sherlock's journals. Inside are several medals. At first they mean nothing to her, but she takes them anyway. If someone was willing to burn the castle over this, the medals must matter. Before she can investigate further, she hears someone approaching and hides. Unable to risk being caught in that room, a man slips inside, trying to move quietly, but Enola reacts first, grabbing him by the neck and demanding to know where Sherlock is. The confrontation turns into a fight, and after Enola beats him fair and square, the man finally identifies himself. His name is Mikhail, and he belongs to the Anti-Reform Party. He explains that he and many others have spent years fighting to free Malta from the British Empire, and that Sherlock's disappearance is almost certainly connected to a woman named Adeline Rath, someone dangerous, powerful, violent, and influential enough to control the governor himself. Mikhail had been following Enola because he believed she might lead him to Adeline's hiding place, or at least give him some way to track her movements. But before the conversation can go any further, the police arrive. Mikhail knows exactly what will happen if they catch him. He'll be locked away for the rest of his life. So he escapes immediately, leaving Enola to face the authorities alone. Enola is taken to the police station, where Sergeant Indri begins questioning her. When she brings up the name Adeline Rath, his reaction is instant. Clearly, the name means something to him. But before Enola can press him for answers, Samson enters the station. Now we learn that Samson isn't just Ernest's uncle, he's also the governor of Malta. He immediately takes control of the situation, humiliating the sergeant and making it clear that Enola isn't someone they're allowed to treat like an ordinary prisoner. He tells Indri that dragging her into such a place is an insult serious enough to cost him his job. Behind Samson is Ernest, who has come to get Enola out before she ends up trapped in a cell. But Enola isn't comforted by Samson's rescue. She understands that Endre might have had useful information, and Samson didn't step in to protect her, he stepped in to protect something else, a secret. Once they leave the police station, Enola shows the medals to Ernest. He recognizes them right away. They belong to his father. They were meant to be given as a wedding gift, but beyond that, he doesn't know why they'd matter to anyone else. A few moments later, Samson separates from the group, and Enola watches him speaking in a rushed, secretive way to a woman nearby. Then she notices something on the woman's dress. The embroidery matches a torn piece of fabric she found on the floor of Sherlock's room. That's enough. The woman heads toward the carnival, and Enola follows. But the woman knows she's being followed. Instead of trying to lose her, she uses the situation to her advantage, leading Enola into a hidden underground warehouse where she controls the surroundings. There, the woman suddenly turns the tables, pulling a gun on Enola and warning her that following her was a mistake. She won't be leaving this place alive. Enola tries to ask about Sherlock, desperate to know where her brother is, but before the woman can say anything useful, a gunshot hits her from behind. She collapses and dies before she can speak another word. Enola immediately takes cover and tries to figure out where the shot came from, but before she can react properly, a rope comes out of nowhere and tightens around her neck. The attacker begins choking her, and with only seconds left before she loses consciousness, Enola manages to pull the powerful figure down with her. When she finally sees who it is, the truth is horrifying. It's Moriarty. Moriarty openly admits that Sherlock is alive but locked away. She's been keeping him prisoner and has taken great pleasure in torturing him over the past several days. She also mocks Ernest and the pain he suffered during the wedding, saying that watching his face fall apart minute by minute while Enola failed to arrive had amused her deeply. She didn't need to kill him immediately, she says, because watching him suffer emotionally was far more entertaining. Then Moriarty attacks Enola with a shovel. The fight turns brutal, and Moriarty nearly kills her. But just as Enola is about to lose, Eudoria, the Holmes matriarch, suddenly appears with a rifle, ready to defend her daughter. Moriarty instantly realizes she's been trapped, but instead of surrendering, she pulls out a glycerin grenade and throws it against the wall. The explosion tears through the structure, creating an opening that lets her escape through a tunnel. Enola is furious with her mother, but beneath that anger is something else. Eudoria actually came to Malta for the wedding. She may not have been willing to appear in public, but she wanted to see her daughter walk down the aisle. She wanted that memory, even if she had to watch from the shadows. Eudoria then warns Enola about Moriarty. If Enola wants to defeat her, she needs to understand that Moriarty thinks in a way very similar to Sherlock, which means Enola can't just focus on what's directly in front of her. She has to study what's been left behind. More importantly, Eudoria has discovered something crucial. Sherlock is still alive, and Enola must do everything she can to rescue him. Eudoria calls Sherlock her favorite child, which irritates Enola immediately, and her mother quickly clarifies that Enola isn't her favorite either, which doesn't exactly warm the moment, but does make it feel painfully like family. Afterward, Enola returns to Ernest and tells him what she's learned. The person behind all of this is an old enemy, and as far as she can tell, both Sherlock and Ernest's mother are still alive. Her reasoning is simple. If Moriarty has kept Sherlock alive, she's probably kept Ernest's mother alive too. For Ernest, that thought brings at least a small measure of relief. Later, as they continue walking and working through the case, Enola spots a small shack near the beach. After everything they've survived at their failed wedding, the kidnapping, the fire, the death, and the return of Moriarty, she and Ernest step inside, finally giving themselves a quiet moment alone. That night, with the chaos finally settling, Enola stops hiding behind excuses and tells Ernest the truth. When she agreed to marry him, she was saying yes to him, to the bond they'd built, the happiness they shared, the life she imagined with the person standing in front of her. But then came everything else: the formal dinners, the powerful families, the expectations, the titles, the stiff manners, the entire world of high society closing in around her from every direction. It wasn't Ernest she feared, it was the life attached to his name. The more she was pushed into that polished world, the more she felt like a stranger wearing someone else's future. She never doubted loving him, she says, and never doubted wanting to spend her life with him. What frightened her was becoming a lady and the way everyone expected. That wasn't the life she wanted, and pretending otherwise had only made everything worse. Meanwhile, Moriarty is enjoying her own game with Sherlock. As he remains trapped, she reveals pieces of her plan, clearly proud of how carefully she's arranged every step. She tells him how simple it was to manipulate Ernest's mother into choosing Malta for the wedding. Moriarty had been preparing everything on the island since she was released a year earlier. Adeline Wrath, she says, was nothing more than a useful piece on the board. Moriarty used her to get close to Ernest's mother, earn her trust, and gently steer her toward the idea that Malta would be the perfect wedding location, since it was where the older woman had married once before. Convincing her was almost too easy. Sherlock tries to keep the conversation going, offering to keep playing Moriarty's cruel intellectual game if she'll at least give Ernest's mother some water. For a moment it seems the bargain might work, but after hearing Sherlock's deductions, Moriarty decides she isn't impressed. His theories, in her opinion, are too loose and uncertain to deserve a reward. So just as the old woman is about to drink, Moriarty pours the water onto the floor instead, then walks away, making sure Sherlock understands the humiliation clearly. In her mind, she's beaten him completely. Back near the tent, Enola gets an unexpected visit from her mother, along with the doctor and Mikhail. But surprisingly, the strongest clue comes from Ernest himself. He remembers that the mysterious woman in the purple dress had been wearing a very expensive, high society hat. That detail matters because it suggests Moriarty isn't acting alone. Someone wealthy and influential is backing her. Ernest believes he knows who that might be. Enola thinks back to the moment she saw the woman speaking in the street. One of the people with her was the governor, Samson. But there was another figure there too, someone wearing a strange fox mask, blonde hair visible beneath it, with medals pinned to their clothing. When they compare that memory with the medals from the box, a match becomes obvious almost immediately. The dead man in the alley, the governor, and the blonde man all shared the same medal, one bearing the word Afghanistan alongside the outline of an elephant. That means the next person they need to confront is Samson. The problem is that he's currently inside the military barracks, and getting in won't be simple. It's the kind of place where one wrong step could get them arrested before they even reach the front door. For that, they'll need Mikhail's help, especially his ability to move quietly and stay unseen. Still, stealth only gets them so far, and when their careful approach starts to fall apart, Eudoria solves the problem in her own very direct way, pulling out a gun, overpowering a police officer, and forcing him to take them straight to the records room. Inside, they search for anything connected to the violent battle in which Ernest's father, his cousins, and the person now at the center of this conspiracy all took part. But when they reach the files, the most important records are missing. Someone has stolen the pages. Luckily, paper remembers more than people expect. The writing may be gone, but the pressure marks remain on the sheets underneath. So by rubbing shaved pencil lead across the page, they reveal the hidden impressions left behind. Slowly, the missing words appear, and with them, the truth comes out. In Afghanistan, British and Maltese troops carried out a massacre in exchange for an enormous amount of gold. What had been buried as a military secret wasn't some honorable act of war, it was bloodshed, greed, and betrayal covered up by medals and official silence. Enola takes the evidence straight to Samson's office and reveals the truth to Ernest. Samson doesn't bother denying it. Instead, he admits that terrible choices get made in war, and he doesn't want Ernest to hate his father. According to Samson, Peter loved his family deeply, but the truth remains ugly. Ernest's father had been in charge of the entire operation. His decisions saved many British and Maltese lives, but they also destroyed far more innocent ones, people who were only defending their own land against an empire that had decided to take it from them. For Ernest, the revelation is devastating. He spent his life standing up for the poor, fighting for fairness, dignity, and equal treatment, so learning his own father was responsible for a massacre shakes him in a way no ordinary betrayal ever could. The man he admired is suddenly tied to something monstrous. Enola then asks Samson the question that matters most: where is the gold? Samson explains what happened on the return voyage. Peter couldn't live with what they'd done. The guilt broke him, so after everyone else had left the ship, he sailed away alone and sank it, making sure no one could ever profit from the innocent lives they'd taken. That detail sparks something in Enola's mind. She suddenly understands where Peter hid the gold. When Ernest was a child, he and his father used to pretend they were pirates, and earlier, while swimming at the beach, Ernest had pointed out a mysterious cave he'd always wanted to explore. Now Enola realizes that cave wasn't just a childhood curiosity, it may have been the hiding place all along. That's where the gold must be. But at the same time, another terrifying realization hits her. Sherlock wasn't the one who left the message on the mirror. He wasn't the one guiding her through the clues. Moriarty was, from the beginning. Moriarty has been using Enola as a tool to solve the mystery for her. She knew that only someone from the Holmes family would be clever enough to uncover the truth, or perhaps someone close enough to becoming part of that family. If Enola hadn't panicked before walking down the aisle, there's no time left to waste. Enola changes out of her wedding clothes and heads straight for the cave. Following the trail her deductions have laid out for her, somewhere inside the hidden place, if she's right, lies the missing ton of gold everyone has been chasing. Inside the cave, she spots something beneath the water, a heavy chain disappearing into the dark surface. She grabs it and pulls with everything she has left. For a moment it barely moves, but she refuses to let go, and after straining against the weight, she finally drags a wooden chest up from the bottom of the sea. Once she breaks the lock open, the truth is right in front of her. The box is full of gold, and not a small amount either, enough for someone to disappear, start over, and live comfortably for the rest of their life. But Enola immediately knows something is wrong. This can't be all of it. According to the records, the stolen treasure wasn't just a chest of coins or bars, it was a full ton of gold. So where's the rest? Before she can return to Watson and tell him what she's found, she realizes she isn't alone. Moriarty has been waiting for her, and she hasn't come empty-handed. A dozen armed men step into position around the cave, surrounding Enola from every angle. Moriarty wants the gold for herself. She tells Enola she's tired of living at the mercy of her own brilliant mind while men with fortunes built on violence and stolen lives keep enjoying everything. In her eyes, she's finally earned something more after outthinking the cleverest man she's ever known. She believes it's her turn to take what she wants and build a better life. But just as Moriarty seems ready to claim victory, the situation shifts. She isn't the only one who brought allies. Ernest suddenly appears with Mikhail beside him, followed by 20 loyal men standing with him in his fight for change. Moriarty is outnumbered, and for a second it looks like they might finally arrest her. But she never lets anything be that simple. Before anyone can restrain her, she pulls 2 grenades from her pockets. Panic breaks out instantly. Gunfire erupts, and in the confusion, Moriarty manages to escape. Enola doesn't let her vanish. She mounts a horse and chases Moriarty across the island, all the way to a nearby abbey, where the 2 women face each other again, and this time, Enola has no intention of losing. Moriarty attacks with everything she has, even a knife, but Enola fights back harder, and after a fierce struggle, she overpowers her. Then Enola enters the abbey and finally finds what she's been fighting for. Sherlock is there, and so is Ernest's mother. Enola frees them both, but the danger isn't over. Moriarty returns with a gun in hand, moments away from executing Enola right there. But Sherlock isn't helpless anymore. He breaks free from his restraints and sneaks up behind Moriarty. Suddenly the weapon is in his hands, and the balance of power has completely shifted. For Sherlock, this is no longer a puzzle or a clever battle of minds. He knows Moriarty too well. A prison will never hold her for long. If she survives, she'll escape, return, and keep destroying lives. To him, there's only one permanent way to stop her, one bullet. But before Sherlock can cross that line and stain his hands with blood, Ernest's mother steps in. She grabs a rock and strikes Moriarty over the head, knocking her unconscious instantly, saving Enola's life and saving Sherlock from becoming the kind of man who kills in cold blood. A few days later, Ernest takes responsibility for everything that's happened. He promises the gold will be returned to the Afghan people, since it belongs to those whose lives were destroyed for it, and he begins pushing for Malta to break free from British control, even though it means his own uncle will have to face serious charges for what was done on the island. With Sherlock safe, Enola and her brother finally make peace. He apologizes for the harsh things he said that night, and Enola does the same. After everything they've lost, risked, and survived, their bond is stronger than the argument that once separated them. Now only one unfinished matter remains: the wedding. The ceremony, interrupted at the beginning of the story, finally takes place, but this time it's nothing like the grand, suffocating event Enola had feared. It's beautiful but humbly honest, personal. Enola Holmes marries Ernest, who has given up his title as Lord so they can build a life that belongs to them, not to society, politics, or anyone else's expectations. There are no overwhelming luxuries, no polished performances, no cold guests waiting to judge every movement. Instead, the couple marries on the cliff where Ernest spent the happiest moments of his life and the same place where he now hopes to build an even better future with his wife. The ceremony is simple, surrounded only by the people who truly love them, and later that night, as fireworks fill the sky above the water, Enola and Ernest celebrate in their own way, not in a ballroom, not under the rules of high society, but swimming beneath the sparks of light, free at last to begin their life together on their own terms. Before getting into the actual mystery of Enola Holmes 3, it's worth talking about the kind of expectations this movie was carrying, because this wasn't the sort of sequel people walked into completely neutral about. By the time a franchise reaches its third installment, the audience already has a relationship with it. You're not just watching the characters anymore, you're comparing the feeling. You remember how the first movie surprised you, and how the second either built on that or at least kept the energy alive. So when the third one arrives, you're naturally waiting to see whether it can hold that same charm. And with Enola Holmes, that charm was a huge part of the appeal. The first two films had a playful, energetic quality. They weren't perfect detective masterpieces, but they knew exactly what they were: a young heroine with personality, a mystery that kept moving, a touch of romance, some family drama, and a light adventure tone that made the whole thing easy to enjoy. You could sit down, get pulled into the case, enjoy Enola's confidence, and still feel like the movie had enough cleverness to hold your attention. That's why a lot of people came into the third film expecting at least that same level. For some viewers, the first two movies had them genuinely invested, actually trying to solve the case, watching for small details, enjoying the feeling of being one step behind Enola. That's a very specific kind of fun. A mystery movie doesn't have to be dark or extremely complex, but it does need to make you curious, and the earlier films did that well enough to earn trust. So when Enola Holmes 3 starts, you're hoping for that same feeling again. You want to be pulled into the investigation, you want the clues to feel satisfying, you want Enola to feel sharper than ever, you want Sherlock to matter, you want the romance with Tewkesbury to keep growing without swallowing everything else. And honestly, you want the movie to prove this series still has a reason to continue. That's where the pressure comes from, as the third movie isn't just judged as a standalone adventure, it's judged against the memory of the first two, and that memory can be tough competition. The earlier films felt spunky, fresh, more focused. They had that sense of discovery, especially because Enola herself still felt like she was carving out her place in a world that constantly underestimated her. By the third film, that underdog freshness is harder to recreate. We already know Enola is capable, clever, and able to challenge the expectations around her, so the movie has to find a new angle. It has to mature with her without losing the spark that made her enjoyable in the first place. That's probably why the reaction to this film is so divided. Some people went in wanting emotional closure, and for them, the movie delivers something meaningful. Others wanted a stronger mystery, the same playful energy, the same chemistry that made the earlier movies work. And for those viewers, the third film starts at a disadvantage. Personally, I think this is the kind of sequel where your expectations really shape your experience. If you mainly wanted to spend more time with Enola, Tewksbury, and Sherlock in this world, there's already comfort in simply returning to it. But if you were hoping the third chapter would be the sharpest, most suspenseful, most confident mystery of the trilogy, that's where disappointment starts to creep in. That's the tricky thing about Enola Holmes 3. It isn't entering an empty room, it's walking into a room where the audience already remembers how fun this franchise used to feel. So even before the plot fully kicks in, the movie has to fight against one question sitting in the back of your mind: can this one still make us feel the way the first two did? That question follows the entire film, and depending on what you loved most about the earlier entries, your answer may be very different. What makes Enola Holmes 3 a little tricky to discuss is that not everyone seems to be reacting from the same place. Some people walked away genuinely happy, and I understand why. There's comfort in being back with these characters. Millie Bobby Brown still has that lively Enola energy. The movie looks good, the romance gets a proper emotional payoff, and for longtime fans, there's a sense the story finally delivers something they'd been waiting for. It feels like a closing chapter in a way a lot of franchise films don't even attempt anymore. But for another group of viewers, this wasn't just a mild step down, it felt like a real disappointment. They expected the third film to build on what worked before, sharpen the mystery, push Enola into a more confident detective role, give Sherlock something stronger to do. Instead, they felt the movie was slower, more predictable, and missing the spark that made the first two so easy to enjoy. That split reaction says a lot about the film itself, because Enola Holmes 3 has pieces that work, just not for the same audience. If you're watching mainly for the emotional side, you may come out satisfied. The wedding, the romance, the family moments, the sense of closure, all of that can land beautifully if you're already attached to Enola and Tewksbury. There's a real sweetness to it, and it knows how to make fans smile in those final moments. But if you're watching primarily as a mystery, the experience gets shakier. The case doesn't have the same pull, the suspense doesn't tighten the same way, and some of the reveals feel too easy to see coming. Once that happens, the movie starts leaning more on charm than actual intrigue, and charm can carry a lot, but it can't carry everything. That's probably why some people call it a fun, satisfying sequel while others describe it as a one-time watch. Both reactions make sense, because the film is trying to do two different things at once: be an emotional conclusion for fans and a clever detective adventure. The emotional conclusion works better than the detective adventure, and that imbalance is where the mixed response really comes from. There are moments where you can feel the old appeal trying to break through, a little banter here, a nice visual there, a romantic scene with real warmth, a familiar character reminding you why this series became popular in the first place. Those moments keep the film from falling apart completely. But then the story slows down, or the mystery becomes too obvious, or a character makes a strange decision, or the movie explains something that would have been more fun to figure out ourselves, and suddenly you remember why some viewers felt let down. So the reaction isn't simply good movie or bad movie, it's more specific than that. For fans wanting closure, Enola Holmes 3 may feel rewarding. For fans wanting the strongest case in the trilogy, it may feel underwhelming. For casual viewers, it might be enjoyable enough in the moment. For people who loved the sharper energy of the first two films, it may feel like something important has faded. That's where I think the film lands in this early discussion. Not terrible, not pointless, but definitely uneven. It has enough hard-to-please part of its audience, but not enough mystery to fully satisfy the rest. The biggest problem with Enola Holmes 3 isn't that it has nothing good in it. It does. The problem is that the first two movies already taught the audience what this franchise could feel like when it was working, and that comparison is hard to ignore. The first movie had freshness on its side. We were meeting Enola properly for the first time, seeing her personality, her rebelliousness, her way of thinking, her messy place inside the Holmes family. That new character finding her voice. Energy is always hard to recreate later. Even when every mystery beat wasn't perfect, the film had momentum because Enola herself felt like a discovery. The second movie, for many people, carried that energy forward. It felt more confident, the mystery had more pull, the character dynamics were stronger, and the film understood what audiences liked about the first one, keeping that playful quality while feeling a little sharper. You could feel the series settling into itself. That's why the third movie feels a little strange. It's bigger in some ways, a fresh setting, more emotional material, a more conclusive feeling, but somehow it doesn't always feel more alive. The earlier films had a quick, cheeky rhythm. Enola would look at the camera, pull you into her thoughts, chase a clue, run into danger, and the whole thing moved with youthful confidence. Here, that rhythm isn't completely gone, but it's weaker. You can still recognize the franchise. The costumes, the direct narration, the romance, Sherlock, the mystery adventure setup are all there, but recognition isn't the same as energy. The first two movies felt like they were inviting you into a game. This one often feels like it's guiding you through a story that's already been solved behind the scenes. That difference matters. A mystery film should make you lean in. The earlier entries made you curious enough to track the details. This one sometimes makes you feel like you are waiting for the movie to catch up to what you've already guessed. Maybe that's why some fans describe it as missing the charm. Charm isn't just jokes or costumes or romance, it's timing, confidence, the feeling that the movie knows exactly how much to reveal and when to hold back. The first two films had more of that balance. Enola Holmes 3 has the ingredients, but the mixture isn't as smooth. Even the humor feels different. The earlier films had a lighter bounce, they knew when to be serious but didn't stay heavy for long. This third movie leans harder into emotion and drama, which makes sense given where Enola is in her life, but it also means some of the carefree fun gets pushed aside. For viewers who loved the playful spirit of the first two, that shift can feel like a loss. The mystery comparison is even tougher. The earlier films made the cases feel more engaging. You wanted to follow the clues, to see how Enola would solve things. Here, the case feels simpler, and the twists don't land with the same surprise. A lot happens, but the actual detective satisfaction is thinner. Then there's the chemistry. The earlier movies built real affection between Enola and Tewksbury, with scenes that had a nervous, youthful charm. In this one, the emotional payoff is bigger, but some viewers felt the spark itself wasn't as strong as before. A romance can reach a beautiful destination and still lose some of the tension that made the journey exciting. So when people say Enola Holmes 3 isn't as strong as the first two, they're not always saying it's unwatchable, they're saying it doesn't quite recreate the feeling that made them fans. It has polish but less surprise, emotion but less bounce, a larger story but not necessarily a better mystery. That's the real issue with comparing it to the earlier films. Those had flaws, yes, but also a genuine sense of discovery. This third one feels more like a franchise trying to complete its emotional checklist while struggling to keep the detective spark alive. For some viewers, the closure will be enough. For others, especially those who came for the cleverness and playful energy, it will feel like the series lost a bit of its personality right when it should have been at its most confident. When it comes to the story itself, this is where the movie starts to feel uneven. Not because the setup lacks potential, it doesn't. A third film should naturally feel like a bigger step. Enola is older now, her life is changing, her relationship with Tewksbury is moving toward something serious, and Sherlock is pulled into a more vulnerable position than usual. On paper, that's a strong foundation: mystery, danger, romance, family tension, and the possibility of a proper final chapter. But the execution doesn't always hold those pieces together. At times the film feels like it knows where it wants to land emotionally but is less confident about how to get there as a story. You can almost feel it aiming for a big, satisfying conclusion, especially for fans who followed Enola from the beginning. The problem is that the journey there sometimes feels rushed, sometimes too simple, and sometimes strangely overloaded, an odd combination. But exactly what happens here? The plot has a lot going on, yet the story itself can still feel thin. Characters move around, secrets get revealed, people are in danger, and the film keeps introducing new complications, but not all of them feel meaningful. Some seem to exist just to make the movie look busier than it really is. That's where the writing starts to show cracks. A good mystery adventure needs a strong backbone. Even in a playful, family-friendly tone, the story needs to feel carefully built. Every new event should pull us deeper into the case or reveal something sharper about the characters. In Enola Holmes 3, some scenes do that, but others feel like they're simply pushing the movie forward because the next thing has to happen. That's probably why some viewers found the writing rushed or unfinished, especially near the ending. The film begins with promise, but as it nears the final stretch, the structure becomes easier to predict. Instead of tightening, it flattens. Instead of surprising us, it confirms what we may already suspect, and once that happens, the story loses some of its grip. There's also a slightly childish quality to parts of the plotting, not in the sense of being made for younger viewers, which is fine given the franchise's light, accessible tone, but in the sense that certain developments feel too convenient, too obvious, or too simply handled. The movie sometimes treats big situations as though they don't need much emotional or logical weight behind them. That weakens the impact, because when a story includes kidnapping, danger, betrayal, romance, family history, and a major villain, the audience needs to feel the pressure of those things. They can't just be plot items. They have to leave a mark. Here, some of those elements happen without landing with the force they should. Still, the film isn't completely lifeless. There are moments where the story works because the characters are familiar enough to carry it. Enola's presence gives scenes energy. Tewksbury's relationship with her gives the movie warmth. Sherlock's situation adds a more serious angle, and the setting gives everything a fresh visual flavor. So while the story may not be strong enough on its own, the franchise's built-in appeal does help cover some of the weaker writing, but only up to a point. By the third movie, the audience expects more than it was nice to see them again. The story needed to feel sharper, more confident, and prove this chapter existed for more than emotional closure. Instead, it sometimes feels like the movie is trying to do too many things without fully developing any one of them. That's why the plot can be entertaining in the moment but not especially memorable afterward. You might enjoy certain scenes, like the characters, even feel satisfied by the ending, but stepping back and looking at the actual story, it doesn't feel as strong as it should. It feels like a decent idea that needed another layer of polish, another pass at the script, and a clearer sense of what the central case was supposed to make us feel. For a casual watch, that might be enough. But for the third film in a series that once felt sharper and more charming, enough isn't the same as satisfying. For a movie with the Holmes name attached, the mystery really should hold everything together, and this is where Enola Holmes 3 struggles most. The film has all the mystery ingredients: clues, danger, hidden motives, suspicious people, and the sense that Enola is being pulled into something larger than she first understands. On a basic level, that's all there, but the case itself doesn't feel as sharp or satisfying as it should. It isn't confusing in a fun way, isn't layered in a way that makes you want to pause and think, isn't the kind of mystery where every scene makes you question what you missed. Instead, it becomes surprisingly easy to stay ahead of the movie, a dangerous place for any detective story to be. With the first two films, even though they weren't the most complex mysteries ever written, there was still a sense of involvement. You were watching Enola work things out, and there was real enjoyment in following her thinking. You felt like the movie wanted you to participate. Maybe you'd catch a clue, maybe you'd miss one, but either way the investigation had enough energy to keep you engaged. Here, that feeling is weaker. A lot of the mystery feels predictable too early. You can sense where the story is going before the movie seems ready to admit it. The villain reveal doesn't have the same impact because the film doesn't hide its hand well enough. The case should slowly tighten around the characters, but instead the answers often feel too close to the surface. That takes away one of the biggest pleasures of watching a Holmes-style story, because we don't watch these films just for action, costumes, or romance. Those help, of course, but the real hook should be curiosity. We want that little "wait, what does this mean?" feeling. We want to suspect the wrong person. We want to think we've figured it out and then realize we were missing one crucial detail. Enola Holmes 3 doesn't create enough of that. The mystery isn't terrible, but it's softer than expected, simplified. It moves forward without that clever bite that makes a detective story memorable. Instead of building suspense, it often just reveals information. And there's a big difference between a mystery unfolding and a plot simply explaining itself. That's why some viewers felt less invested this time. The film gives you events but not always intrigue, movement but not always tension. There are moments meant to feel urgent or surprising that instead land like steps in a story we already understand. When the detective element is weak, everything else has to work harder. The romance has to carry more weight. The visuals have to hold your attention. The performances have to make scenes feel alive even when the case itself isn't pulling you in. Sometimes they do. Millie Bobby Brown's presence helps, the setting helps, the emotional ending helps, but those things can't fully replace the pleasure of a good mystery. What makes it more frustrating is that Enola herself is built for a better case than this. She's curious, bold, quick-thinking, emotionally driven. She should be facing a mystery that tests all of those qualities. Instead, the case often feels too easy for her, or worse, too easy for us. That's probably the clearest way to describe the problem. The movie doesn't always make Enola look brilliant by giving her something brilliant to solve. It simply moves her through a case that doesn't push back hard enough. For a casual adventure, that might be fine, but for a third Enola Holmes film, especially after the first two built a real sense of detective fun, it feels like a missed opportunity. The movie has heart, familiar faces, a few enjoyable turns, but as a mystery, it needed to be sharper, sneakier, and much harder to solve. One of the things that really hurts Enola Holmes 3 is how the clues are handled. Not that every clue is bad, that would be too harsh. There are still pieces of investigation, ciphers, hidden connections, moments where the film clearly wants us to feel inside Enola's process, but too often the movie doesn't let those clues breathe. It hands them over too neatly. A good detective story should make you work a little, not in a frustrating way, and not so obscurely that the audience has no chance of understanding anything, but just enough that you feel involved. You want to notice something in the background, wonder why a character said a certain line, connect two details before the detective does, or get misled and enjoy being wrong. Here, that pleasure is often missing. A lot of the clues feel placed directly in Enola's path. She finds something, explains it, follows it, and the next clue appears, then another, then another. After a while it starts to feel less like deduction and more like the story is leaving breadcrumbs with bright signs pointing to them. That matters because Enola isn't supposed to be someone who just happens to stumble onto things. She's supposed to think differently, to observe what other people miss. That's the whole appeal of watching her grow into her own kind of detective. But too often in this film it feels like the mystery is helping her more than she's solving it. The cipher clues are a good example. They show up so conveniently that they feel less exciting each time. Less like clever puzzles hidden inside the story and more like shortcuts. The movie needs Enola to move to the next stage, so a clue appears. It needs the audience to understand something, so Enola explains it. It needs progress, so the mystery hands her another piece. That's not the same as investigation. This is where the film loses some of its Holmes flavor. Even in a lighter Holmes story, The satisfaction comes from watching intelligence at work. Seeing the detective notice a contradiction, read a room, catch a lie, understand a motive, predict what someone might do next. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it should feel earned. In Enola Holmes 3, too much feels handed over. The movie also over-explains. There are moments where it seems worried the audience might miss something, so it spells everything out. But that's exactly what makes the mystery feel smaller. When every important piece is underlined, there's no tension in figuring it out, no space for the viewer to think, wait, did I catch that right? And that's a shame, because the series already had a built-in way to make this fun. Enola's direct address to the audience could have pulled us further into her thinking, made us feel like we were solving alongside her. But when the clues are too obvious, that device can start to feel like the movie explaining the homework after already giving us the answers. That's why some viewers felt Enola wasn't really developing as a detective. She's older, more experienced now. This should have been the film where her deductive skills felt sharper than ever. Instead, she still stumbles onto important pieces in a way that feels too familiar from earlier entries. And when Sherlock also isn't shown properly anticipating things, the problem compounds. It's not just Enola who feels underwritten as a detective, but the whole Holmes side of the story. That may sound like a small thing, but it's actually central to why the film feels weaker as a mystery. If the heroes are famous for their intelligence, the writing has to be intelligent enough to support them. The case has to challenge them, the clues have to feel hidden but fair, the discoveries have to feel earned. Otherwise the movie is only telling us they're brilliant, not proving it. That's the frustrating part of Enola Holmes 3. It still has the look and language of a mystery. Enola chasing clues, trying to solve something important. But the actual detective work rarely has that spark of cleverness. The film needed fewer obvious clues and more genuine deduction. Fewer convenient ciphers and more moments where Enola actually outthinks the situation, fewer explanations and more trust in the audience. Because when a mystery lets us participate, we remember it. When it just hands us the answers, we move on. Another major issue is that the story feels overloaded and strangely, not in a rich, layered way. It's not the kind of busy plot where every thread connects beautifully by the end and you look back thinking, okay, that was actually well planned. It feels more like the movie keeps piling on ingredients because it wants the third film to feel bigger than the first two. There's a kidnapping, stolen treasure, corrupt soldiers, Maltese revolutionaries, revenge, family tension, political conflict, Sherlock in danger, and Enola's romance moving toward marriage. And somewhere inside all of that, there's supposed to be a mystery. That's a lot for one movie to carry. To be fair, a sequel should expand things a bit, and you don't want the third film to feel like the same case in different costumes. Moving into a wider world, adding danger, history, and emotional consequence all makes sense. The problem isn't ambition, it's control. Enola Holmes 3 sometimes feels like it's juggling too many ideas without giving enough attention to any of them. The kidnapping plot should feel urgent, tightening the story and putting real pressure on every decision. But because the film has so much else going on, that urgency doesn't always stay alive. The danger is technically there, but the emotional panic isn't as strong as it should be. Then the treasure angle arrives, and the movie starts leaning more into adventure than investigation. That can be fun, but it also pulls attention away from the detective side. Instead of Enola peeling back a brilliant mystery layer by layer, it starts to feel like she's being pushed through different plot stations. Then come the corrupt soldiers and the revolutionaries, and the film reaches for a bigger political backdrop. Not a bad idea in itself. A story set in Malta with conflict and power struggles could have added real freshness. But the film doesn't always slow down enough to let those pieces feel fully alive. They become part of the noise around the mystery instead of something that deepens it. That's where the narrative starts to feel messy. A strong mystery usually needs focus. Even with multiple suspects and side plots, there has to be a clear center pulling everything together. Here, the center keeps shifting. One moment it's about the kidnapping, then treasure, then Moriarty, then political conflict, then Enola's future with Tewkesbury, then Sherlock's vulnerability. Some of those threads are genuinely interesting and could have worked well on their own, but together they make the film feel crowded, and the more crowded it gets, the less room there is for suspense. That might sound counterintuitive. Usually more plot means more excitement, but it doesn't always work that way. If everything is happening at once, the audience doesn't automatically feel more engaged. Sometimes we feel less connected, because the movie is moving too quickly between ideas without letting the important ones land. That happens repeatedly here. A character is in danger, but before it can really sink in, the story's already moved on. A new complication appears before we fully understand why the last one mattered. It keeps the movie busy, but busy isn't the same as gripping. The earlier Enola Holmes films had plenty of moving parts too, but they felt cleaner. The stories had room to breathe, the mystery was easy to follow without feeling empty, and the emotional beats had space around them. In this third film, the movie seems afraid that slowing down will lose the audience's interest. Ironically, by adding too much, it sometimes achieves the opposite. When everything matters, nothing gets enough time to matter properly. The romance wants space. Sherlock's situation wants space. Moriarty wants space. The Malta setting wants space. The political material wants space. The treasure plot wants space. But the film only has so much room, so instead of one strong story, we get several half-developed threads competing with each other. That's probably why some viewers describe the plot as haphazard or unfinished, not because the movie lacks ideas, but because it has too many, and lacks the discipline to decide which one should dominate. Personally, I think the film would have been stronger with one clear spine to build everything around, either a tight kidnapping mystery, or a full treasure adventure, or Moriarty as the central psychological threat, or the emotional marriage storyline as the core with a simpler case underneath. Trying to do all of it at once weakens the impact. By the end you understand what happened, but understanding isn't the same as satisfaction. The movie gives you plot, movement, danger, romance, politics, family, and adventure, but what it needed was a sharper shape, a cleaner mystery, a story where every thread felt necessary instead of just present. That's why the overcrowded narrative becomes such a problem. Enola Holmes 3 clearly wants to feel larger and more mature, but in trying to expand the world, it sometimes loses the simple pleasure that made the earlier films work. Following Enola through one case that actually feels worth solving. One place where the film starts to feel less like a detective story and more like a familiar adventure movie is the treasure race angle. To be clear, treasure hunts can be fun. A hidden object, a map, a secret location, people chasing the same prize from different sides is a setup that's worked in plenty of movies. It gives a story momentum, gives characters a reason to keep moving, and can even sharpen a mystery if the clues are clever enough. But here, the treasure element feels a little too easy. The earlier Enola Holmes movies were at their best when the mystery felt personal and investigative. Enola wasn't just chasing an object, she was trying to understand people, motives, secrets, and social traps. The cases had a sense of discovery because the story wasn't only asking where is the object, but what's really happening here. Once this third film leans into the treasure hunt, the detective side loses some of that texture. It becomes more about reaching the prize than solving the case. That shift matters, because Enola isn't supposed to feel like just another adventure hero chasing hidden treasure. Her strength should come from reading the situation better than everyone else, not simply arriving at the next location because the plot points her there. That's probably why some viewers felt the movie became cliché. Copyright. The moment the story turns into a treasure race, it starts feeling like something we've seen many times before. Less surprise in the structure, an easily anticipated rhythm, discover a clue, chase the next lead, run into danger, get closer to the prize, face the villain near the end. It's not boring exactly, but it is familiar, and familiarity is dangerous for a mystery film. If the audience can sense the story's shape too clearly, suspense weakens. You stop wondering what's going to happen and start waiting for the next expected step. That's where Enola Holmes 3 loses some of its edge. The treasure itself should have felt more mysterious, more emotionally important, or more tightly connected to Enola's personal journey. Instead, for some viewers it becomes more of a plot device, giving the characters something to chase without making the story deeper. The film wants the treasure to raise the stakes, but sometimes it has the opposite effect, making the case feel more ordinary. That's a shame, because stronger emotional material was already sitting right there. Sherlock in danger, Enola stepping into marriage, Tewksbury's family becoming more involved, Moriarty returning as a threat. Any of those could have anchored a more focused story, but when the treasure hunt takes over, the emotional and detective elements have to compete for space, and the result is a movie that feels bigger but not sharper. Maybe that's the real issue. The treasure race gives the film scale, but scale isn't the same as cleverness. It gives the characters somewhere to go, but not always something interesting to figure out. For a different kind of movie that might be enough, but for Enola Holmes, it feels slightly off-brand, because the fun of this franchise should come from Enola noticing what others miss, her mind moving faster than the people around her, the audience trying to keep up with her. When the story leans too hard into chasing treasure, it reduces that pleasure and turns the mystery into a route, and once a mystery starts feeling like a route, the excitement gets much harder to sustain. So yes, the treasure hunt gives Enola Holmes 3 some adventure and movement, a more obvious third film scale, but it also makes the movie feel less unique, less clever, and less satisfying as a Holmes-style case. The film needed the treasure to feel like the center of a brilliant mystery. Instead, too often, it just feels like the thing everyone is running after. One of the more divisive parts of Enola Holmes 3 is how it handles its themes. This franchise has never been shy about what it believes. From the start, these movies have been built around Enola pushing against a world that keeps trying to define her before she can define herself, a young woman trying to make space for her own intelligence, her own choices, her own future in a society that doesn't make that easy. So the issue isn't that Enola Holmes 3 has messages, the issue is that sometimes the messages feel louder than the story. There are ideas here about women's rights, independence, power, British colonialism, and who gets respected in society. On their own, these aren't bad themes, in fact, they could have made the movie richer if woven naturally into the mystery. A detective story can absolutely carry social commentary, sometimes that even sharpens the case, because the mystery isn't just about who did something, but why the world allowed it to happen. But here, the balance doesn't always feel smooth. At times it feels like the movie is repeating points the series has already made. Men are often shown as foolish, arrogant, useless, or easily outperformed. Women are framed as sharper, stronger, more capable, more morally aware. That contrast has been part of the franchise's identity from the start, but by the third movie it needed a new angle. Needed to show growth rather than simply restating the same idea against a bigger backdrop. That's where some viewers may feel frustrated, because after a while, the commentary can feel less like character drama and more like a message being pushed through the plot. Instead of letting us discover these ideas through Enola's choices, Sherlock's failures, Tewksbury's role, or Moriarty's motives, the film sometimes underlines the point too strongly, and when everything is underlined, the audience can feel managed rather than moved. The colonialism angle has a similar problem. Bringing British colonialism into the story could have added real weight, given the multi-setting more historical tension, and made the mystery feel connected to something larger than a simple treasure chase. But the film doesn't always develop that material deeply enough. It gives the story a broader political flavor without becoming as dramatically powerful as it could be. So instead of a fully explored theme, it can feel like another layer added onto an already crowded story. That's the pattern throughout. The film has things it wants to say, but because the plot is already juggling romance, kidnapping, treasure, Moriarty, Sherlock, family, and the emotional ending, the themes don't always get the room they need. They're present but not always integrated, and when themes aren't integrated, they can start to feel like interruptions. This is especially noticeable because the mystery itself isn't strong enough to carry everything underneath it. If the case were sharper, the commentary might have felt more organic. If the clues were cleverer, if the villain were more layered, if the investigation forced Enola to confront these ideas more personally, the messages would have landed with more impact. But when the detective story feels thin, the themes become more exposed and you notice what the film is saying more than what the story is doing, and that's never ideal. The best version of this movie would have let its messages come through action and consequence, show Enola learning something difficult, show Sherlock challenged in a way that changes him, show Tewksbury's position creating real conflict, show Moriarty's anger or ideology with enough depth that we understand why she became this kind of threat. Let the politics of the world shape the mystery instead of sitting around it. There are moments where the film comes close and Enola's emotional growth around love and independence feels genuinely personal. That part works better because it's tied directly to her life. She isn't just making a speech about freedom, she's choosing what freedom means for her. That's more interesting, but the broader commentary isn't always handled with the same care, which is why this topic divides viewers so much. Some will appreciate that the film keeps speaking about women, power, independence, and social injustice, seeing it as part of what makes Enola Holmes distinct. Others will feel the movie is recycling the same themes without adding new depth and doing it at the expense of mystery and character development. Personally, I think the film's heart is in the right place, but the execution isn't always subtle. It wants to be meaningful, modern, to say something beyond the case but meaning doesn't come from the simply repeating a message. It comes from making that message feel alive inside the story. Too often, Enola Holmes 3 seems more interested in reminding us what it stands for than in building a mystery strong enough to make those ideas unforgettable. One thing the film clearly wants us to feel is that Enola is no longer the same girl we met at the start of the series and that makes sense. By the third movie, she can't just be running around with the same restless teenage energy forever. She's been through cases, danger, heartbreak, family complications, and the constant pressure of proving she deserves to be taken seriously. So the film tries to move her into a more mature stage of life. You can feel that in how it frames her, still quick, still stubborn, still playful in moments, but with a different emotional weight around her now. She's not only trying to solve a case, she's standing at the edge of a major personal change. Her relationship with Tewksbury is no longer just a charming romantic thread in the background, it's become part of the question of who she's going to be next. That's probably the part of her growth that works best. The film understands that growing up doesn't mean Enola has to become less herself. It doesn't erase her independence or turn her into someone else. Instead, it puts her in a situation where she has to figure out whether love, commitment, and vulnerability can coexist with the freedom she's always fought for. And honestly, that's a good direction for her, because Enola's journey was never just about proving she could solve mysteries, it was also about proving she had the right to choose her own life. In the earlier films, that meant resisting control, refusing to be shaped by other people's expectations. Here, the choice becomes more personal. It's no longer simply can Enola stand on her own, we already know she can. The question becomes, can she let someone stand beside her without feeling like she's lost herself? That's a more mature question, and when the movie focuses on it, Enola genuinely feels like she's growing, not just louder or more confident, but more emotionally open, grappling with the idea that independence isn't always the same as isolation. There's a softness in that, giving the character more texture than if the film had simply repeated her old rebellious beats. At the same time, the film doesn't always handle this growth smoothly. There are moments where Enola's emotional maturity is clear, but her detective maturity feels less convincing, creating a strange imbalance. As a person she seems to be moving forward, but as an investigator she sometimes feels stuck in the same pattern. She still reacts quickly, still follows clues, still throws herself into danger, but the movie doesn't always show her becoming sharper the way a third chapter should. That's where the character growth feels incomplete. Emotionally she's changed, But professionally, as a detective, the film needed to show more that she'd learned from every previous case, that she was not just braver but smarter, more strategic, more capable of seeing the whole board before everyone else does. Instead, the movie sometimes tells us she's extraordinary while giving her situations that don't fully prove it. Still, there's something satisfying about watching Enola step into a new chapter of her life. The film gives her the closure many fans want today. She's not left wondering or unfinished, but reaches a point where her personal identity, her love story, and her future all come together meaningfully. I think that's why some viewers were happy with this movie even while admitting the mystery wasn't the strongest. They weren't only watching for the case, they were watching for Enola. They wanted to see her happy, to see her choose love without being weakened by it, to see her grow into a version of herself with both spark and heart. On that level, the film delivers. It may not give Enola the smartest mystery or always show her deductive growth clearly, but it understands that this chapter is about her becoming someone who can be independent and emotionally honest at the same time. For a character who began by fighting so hard not to be controlled by anyone, that's a quietly important step. Not perfect growth, but real enough to matter. This is where Enola becomes a little frustrating in the third film, because the movie keeps reminding us she's clever. That's the whole foundation of the character, not just brave, not just rebellious and energetic, but sharp. She's a Holmes, maybe not as cold or controlled as Sherlock, but still someone who sees patterns other people miss. And when the film lets her be that version of herself, she's fun to watch. The problem is that Enola Holmes 3 doesn't always protect her intelligence. There are moments where Enola makes choices that don't feel like the mistakes of a smart person under pressure. They feel more like the script needed her to do something careless so the next scene could happen. That's a very different thing. A character can make mistakes. In fact, they should. If Enola solved everything perfectly, never panicked, never misread anyone, and was never caught off guard, she'd be boring. Flaws make her human, but the mistakes still need to match the character. They need to come from emotion, urgency, fear, pride, overconfidence. Something believable. Here, some of her decisions just feel odd. There are situations where she gives up an advantage for no strong reason, dangerous moments where she doesn't respond with the urgency you'd expect, times when she leaves a threat too open, almost as if she forgets the danger she's dealing with. For an ordinary adventure hero, you might shrug that off, but for Enola Holmes it stands out, because the movie is asking us to believe she's brilliant while showing us behavior that sometimes feels careless. That disconnect matters. If Enola is meant to be a genius detective, her choices should reflect that. Even when she's emotional, she can be impulsive, bold, even reckless in a way that fits her personality. But recklessness isn't the same as carelessness. A smart, reckless character takes risks because she sees an opening. A badly written reckless character takes risks because the story needs trouble. Too often, this film falls into the second category. It's especially noticeable because the mystery itself already doesn't push her hard enough, so when the case feels simple and Enola still makes questionable decisions, the character starts to feel less impressive than she should. The movie wants us to cheer for her as this capable young detective, but doesn't always give her the kind of clever problem-solving that would earn that reaction. That's probably why some viewers felt disappointed in her development. By the third film, Enola should be more experienced. They should have learned from earlier dangers, gotten better at reading people, anticipating traps, staying composed when things go wrong. Instead, there are moments where she still behaves like someone stumbling through the plot, hoping the next clue appears in time, and that hurts the detective fantasy. The best version of Enola isn't perfect. She's messy, emotional, funny, stubborn, and sometimes too quick to act. But underneath all of that, you should always feel the mind working. Even when scared, she's noticing. Even when angry, she's connecting details. Even when wrong, she's wrong in a way that makes sense. In Enola Holmes 3, that inner sharpness isn't always visible. The film spends a lot of energy telling us who Enola is, but the stronger choice would have been to show it through smarter decisions. Let her set a trap, Let her read a room better than Sherlock in a way that feels earned. Let her use emotional intelligence as an actual detective skill rather than just a personality trait. Let her win because she understood something no one else did. That would have made her growth feel much stronger. Instead we get a version of Enola who's still charming, still easy to like, still carried by Millie Bobby Brown's energy, but not always written with the intelligence the character deserves. That's the frustrating part. And you want to root for her, you do root for her, but every careless, unbelievable choice chips away at the idea that she's becoming a truly great detective. For this third film, Enola didn't need to become Sherlock, she just needed to feel sharper than before. Too often, the writing holds her back from that. Millie Bobby Brown is still the main reason this franchise has a pulse. Even when Enola Holmes 3 isn't working as smoothly as it should, she gives the movie a center. There's a restless energy she brings to Enola that makes the character immediately recognizable. The quick expressions, the confidence, the impatience, the little flashes of humor, all of that is still there, and you can feel why this role became so closely tied to her. Honestly, without her, this third film would probably feel a lot weaker, because the story itself has real problems. The mystery isn't always gripping, the plot gets crowded, and some emotional beats don't land as strongly as they should. But Brown keeps pushing the movie forward. She makes Enola feel alive even when the writing around her is doing something predictable, moving quickly from playful to serious, from mischievous energy in one moment to real emotional weight in the next. Sherlock Holmes isn't just another side character. At the moment you put that name into a story, the audience brings certain expectations with it. He's supposed to be sharp, to notice what others miss. Even when he isn't the main focus, his presence should change the temperature of a scene. You should feel that if Sherlock is involved, the mystery has to work harder. In this film, he doesn't always get that treatment. He spends too much of the story feeling weakened, trapped, or pushed aside. The kidnapping angle is meant to create stakes, and on paper it could work. Taking Sherlock out of his usual position of control could make him more vulnerable and give Enola a reason to step up, but the execution makes him look less like a legendary detective caught in a dangerous situation and more like a character the plot simply needed out of the way. That's frustrating, because if Sherlock is going to be kidnapped, fooled, or outmaneuvered, the movie has to make the threat feel brilliant enough to justify it. The villain terrifyingly clever, the trap unavoidable, the situation making us think, okay, even Sherlock could have been caught by this. That's not always the feeling here. Too often, he just seems surprisingly helpless, and when the world's greatest detective is made helpless without the story earning it, the audience notices. It doesn't make Enola look stronger, it makes the writing look weaker. That's the key point. A strong Enola doesn't require a weak Sherlock. The film could have shown both of them as intelligent in different ways. A Sherlock analytical, controlled, strategic, Enola more instinctive, emotionally sharp, unpredictable. That contrast would have made their dynamic richer. They don't need to compete for competence. But the movie sometimes acts as though Enola can only shine if Sherlock is dimmed, and that's a mistake. When Sherlock is wasted, the whole detective world loses credibility. If he can't anticipate danger, read the situation, or meaningfully affect the case, what exactly is the story doing with him? At that point he isn't functioning as a legendary figure, mentor, rival intelligence, or even a properly useful supporting character. He's just there to be placed in danger. Henry Cavill still brings presence to the role. That's not really the issue. He has the calmness, warmth, and quiet authority that make this version of Sherlock watchable, but the script doesn't give him enough sharp material. Plenty of emotional moments, not enough detective ones. And for Sherlock Holmes, that feels like half the character has been left outside the room. The strangest thing is that the movie clearly understands the value of Sherlock as a symbol. It uses his name, his reputation, his connection to Enola, the weight he carries in this world, but doesn't always let him live up to that weight. It wants the benefit of Sherlock Holmes without always writing Sherlock Holmes level intelligence. That becomes more noticeable because the mystery itself is already predictable. If the case were extremely clever, Maybe Sherlock being caught off guard would feel more believable, but when the audience can see certain turns coming and Sherlock can't, the imbalance is hard to ignore. Instead of thinking, wow, Moriarty is dangerous, you start thinking, why isn't Sherlock sharper here? That's not the reaction a film wants. A better version of this story would have used Sherlock's vulnerability without reducing his mind. Emotionally shaken but still observant, in danger but still quietly working out the pieces before anyone realizes it. That would have made him feel human without feeling wasted. The truth is Sherlock doesn't need a huge amount of screen time to matter. He just needs the right scenes, a few moments of real deduction, a few where his intelligence changes the direction of the story, a few where Enola learns from him, challenges him, or even surpasses him in a way that feels earned. That would have been enough. But in Enola Holmes 3, Sherlock often feels underused in exactly the area where he should be strongest. The movie gives him emotional vulnerability, which is interesting, but takes away too much of his effectiveness, which is damaging. And by the end, that becomes one of the film's most disappointing choices. Not because Sherlock needed to be the hero, but because if you're going to bring Sherlock Holmes into a story, even as a supporting figure, you have to let him feel like Sherlock Holmes. Too often here, he feels like a famous name being moved around by the plot instead of a brilliant mind shaping it. The Holmes family thread in Enola Holmes 3 is interesting, because it's clearly something the movie wants to matter. This franchise has never treated Enola as though she exists entirely on her own. Yes, she's independent, and yes, she's building an identity outside Sherlock's shadow. But the Holmes name is still huge in her story. It follows her everywhere, affects how people see her, how she sees herself, and how much pressure sits on her shoulders. By the third movie, you'd expect that family legacy to feel even stronger, because Enola is no longer just proving she can survive without her brothers. She's stepping into adulthood, making choices about love, marriage, danger, work, and the kind of life she actually wants. That's the perfect moment for a story to dig deeper into what being part of the Holmes family really means. The movie does touch on that. Sherlock's presence gives Enola's journey a familiar emotional anchor, and his vulnerability shifts their dynamic. For once, he isn't only the older brother observing from a distance, but someone who can be affected, pulled into danger, someone Enola has to actively care about. That has potential. It suggests the Holmes family isn't just a collection of brilliant minds, but a messy emotional structure full of people who don't always know how to express care properly. When the film leans into that, it gives the story real warmth. Enola isn't just chasing a case, she's also dealing with what it means to love difficult people, protect them, and still remain her own person. But the family side also feels incomplete. Certain Holmes family elements are either missing or barely used. Sherlock's brother being oddly left out makes the family picture feel smaller than it should. Not every character needs a huge role that would make an already crowded film worse. But the absence is noticeable, because the movie keeps circling themes of family, identity, and legacy without fully expanding them. There's also the issue of the Holmes name itself. The movie benefits from it constantly. Sherlock's reputation, Enola's connection to it, the audience's familiarity with the idea of Holmes-level intelligence. But it doesn't always deliver the sharpness that should come with that name. That's a problem, because legacy isn't just about references, it's about standard. If you're going to build a story around the Holmes family, the thinking needs to feel clever. The case needs to feel worthy of them. The characters need to justify why the name matters beyond branding. In Enola Holmes 3, that doesn't always happen. The film clearly wants Enola to represent a new kind of Holmes, which is a strong idea. She isn't Sherlock, and shouldn't be. Her intelligence can be more emotional, instinctive, connected to people, and that difference is what makes her interesting. But the movie needed to define that contrast more clearly, to show how she carries the family legacy while also changing it. Instead, the legacy sometimes feels like background decoration. Sherlock is there but weakened, the wider family is underused, and Enola is growing but her detective development isn't sharp enough. So the Holmes name remains important in theory but doesn't always feel powerful in practice. If you came into this mainly wanting to see Enola and Tewksbury get their happy ending, you may walk away satisfied and maybe even really satisfied. The wedding, the family presents, the sense of Enola choosing love without losing herself, all of it gives the film a soft, heartfelt final note. But if you came for a clever case, sharp deduction, a dangerous villain, and that playful detective spark from the first two films, this one may leave you wanting more. That's the split right there. As a conclusion to Enola's emotional journey, the movie has real value. As a mystery adventure, it feels undercooked, and that makes the rewatch value a little complicated too. Some fans will absolutely watch it again, especially if they're attached to the characters. There's comfort in returning to this world. The Malta setting is beautiful, the costumes are lovely, and the ending has that feel-good quality that can make a flawed movie easier to revisit. But for viewers disappointed by the plot, I don't think this is the kind of sequel that demands a second watch. Once you already know where the mystery is going, there isn't much hidden underneath to rediscover. The clues aren't layered enough. The villain isn't mysterious enough. The twists aren't strong enough to make you want to go back and catch what you missed. Because honestly, there isn't that much to miss. That's not meant cruelly, it's just the nature of a predictable mystery. A great detective film gets better on rewatch because you notice the setup, the small details, how carefully everything was planted. Here, the story is easier to consume than to revisit. It can be fun in the moment, especially for fans, but it doesn't have that deeper puzzle box quality. So for some people, this will be a sweet comfort watch. For others, it'll be a one-time thing, and both reactions make sense. The movie also has an interesting quality of feeling like both an ending and not quite an ending. On one hand, it offers enough closure that the trilogy could stop here. Enola reaches a major emotional milestone, her relationship reaches a clear destination, and the final scenes carry that sense of completion, like the film is gently closing the book on this stage of her life. And if this really is the final movie, at least it doesn't leave the audience stranded.